We knew on this show that JD Davis really didn't have a spot on the Giants roster anymore, but it was surprising nonetheless when they put him on waivers. It meant they couldn't find a trade for him. And then it was also surprising when he cleared waivers, and then the Giants released him, and this unleashed a war of words between the Giants and JD Davis's representation because JD Davis's contract was not guaranteed. Were the Giants wrong to do what they did, or did JD Davis's agent make a huge mistake?
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015. I've been hosting this show almost 5 years to the day, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button or thumbs up button wherever it is that you're following the show, or how about both if you're able to do so. Thank you very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And where we get started is just by untangling this complicated web that is this situation with JD Davis that all started with the signing of Matt Chapman. I've been very clear, despite, some people not totally agreeing and suggesting that there is a role for JD Davis on this team, that I just could not find a way to fit him onto the team. If you want to hear explanations, just go back and listen to past episodes that talk about the Chapman signing and JD Davis's fit moving forward. Should be in the title, but basically he didn't fit, in my opinion. And so it felt like a trade was inevitable. But what I didn't foresee was that they would not be able to find a trade partner. And that was evidently the case when over the weekend, the Giants placed JD Davis on outright waivers. And so what this means is that every team in the league had the opportunity to make a claim on JD Davis at his salary, which it turns out was not guaranteed, according to the rules of the collective bargaining agreement, of $6.9 million. It would not become guaranteed until and unless he made it to opening day without being released. And so any team, though, if you needed a third baseman, here was one, or first baseman or DH for just kind of a reasonable $6.9 million. But the thing is, this market has not been kind to mid-tier free agents. Even the high-end free agents, like some of them, like Snell and Montgomery, are still sitting out there. But there's a whole mid-tier as well. But I thought that at $6.9 million, there were some teams that might make a claim on him. Wasn't totally shocked that he went unclaimed, but nonetheless, he did go unclaimed, and the Giants released him. And this is when a war of words ended up getting released as a result of what the Giants did next, which is that they released JD Davis. And so let me just break it down to you in the simplest of terms. Because the Giants went to an arbitration hearing with JD Davis, that made his contract, whatever it ended up being, whether the Giants won the case or JD Davis won his arbitration case, that 6.9 or 6.55, which those were the two numbers that were filed. The agent, JD Davis's agent representing JD Davis, asked for 6.9 million. The Giants had countered at 6.55, and they have I've said this 1,000 times, firm policy of not negotiating once those numbers have been exchanged. That means they will take those two numbers to an arbitration hearing where a panel of just random people will pick one or the other. There's no middle ground. They could, in theory, continue to negotiate, but the Giants' policy is not to negotiate once numbers have been exchanged, and the numbers get exchanged by a deadline. And this is where the war of words comes into play, because J.D. Davis's agent, once the Giants released him, and it meant that the Giants owed him only 30 days of prorated pay of his $6.9 million quote-unquote salary, which is about $1.1 million. The Giants got to release him, even though he won his hearing and was set to make $6.9 million. They only had to pay $1.1. Whereas if they had agreed without going to a hearing, the whole amount would have been guaranteed. And I guess I'm actually going to start kind of from the top down, which is that never mind. I should definitely start from the other way, which is through J.D. Davis's representation. Hannaford is the name of the agent. And he says, Hannaford is the last name. I apologize. I don't have it on hand, the first name, but that he said this to the media. He said, in my 22 years in the business, I've never seen a club in arbitration make their one and only offer less than an hour before the exchange deadline, exchange of figures, that ended up hundreds of thousands of dollars below their filing number. The way the Giants negotiated gave JD no choice but to go to a hearing, which he did and which we won. And so that at first struck me, not the fact that they cut him loose. And there was some talk on Twitter about if they had 2 more days later and they would have owed him like 45 days of prorated pay. But that's kind of a marginal-ish difference. Like it's kind of like $600,000 or something, right? So that's not the big story here that the Giants did. It wasn't the timing of this release. The big story is the fact that they didn't owe him the full amount of the salary. And so in his 22 years, he's never seen a club. So this just gives us a window into how the Giants chose to negotiate here, which is that they made an offer. And what's important, though, to point out is that he said their offer ended up being hundreds of thousands of dollars below their filing number. He didn't say millions below, hundreds of thousands below. And so if you're the agent, you're passing up. So the Giants filed at $6.55 million. So I said, let's be generous and say hundreds of thousands of dollars means they offered $6 million, which later we're going to hear from Farhan Zaidi, who gave a very specific number that they said that they offered to him that was turned down. And he's going to say what was basically the counteroffer from J.D. Davis's camp that looks a bit unreasonable. And we'll discuss all of that. But say it was $6 million. You're talking $6 million in guaranteed money. Like, for sure, your client is making $6 million, put it in the bank, it's a done deal if you accept the offer. Versus what they ended up doing was not accepting the Giants' offer and then ultimately themselves filing for a number that was just $6.9 million. And so would you rather have $6 million in guaranteed money or the chance at winning a case for $6.9 million that won't be guaranteed when you're on a team that has been linked to Matt Chapman all offseason and he's still a free agent at this time? And so you should know that there's a chance they sign Matt Chapman. And like, I could tell you immediately when they signed Matt Chapman that there wasn't space on the roster for J.D. Davis. And so this actually to me seems like a huge blunder by the agent, Hannaford. I wish I could find his first, Matt Hannaford. Huge blunder because take the guaranteed money. I'd rather take $6 million guaranteed than the chance for $6.9 million that could end up being like $1 million if the Giants were to sign a Matt Chapman and cut me loose before the season. So anyway, more context. We're going to get Farhan Zaidi's answer or response that he didn't have to give, but he did give to all this. It's very fascinating. You do not often see such specificity coming from a front office about negotiations like this. So it's crazy that they're having this war of words. And also just we're going to talk about what it means for JD Davis, because ultimately it stinks. And I don't want him to be going through this. But it does to me just seem like the agent overplayed his hand. So we'll get into more and Zaidi's comments in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our so-good friends over at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. You can also bet on the NBA. You can do baseball futures and, of course, the baseball season coming up, and then we'll have live, or daily baseball action as well. But the, NCAA tournament going on right now, or at least, going on right now. I honestly don't know, but I do know that your bracket is probably busted if it is going on right now, but the fun doesn't have to stop there. And if you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, again, $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. And you can bet on someone who's like a heavy favorite, okay? And you get those 200 bonus bets. So it's a win-win, and I hope you check it out, FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, as promised, we are going to hear from Farhan Zaidi, who kind of, I don't want to say in an unprecedented way, but he responded to these comments by JD Davis's representation that was kind of, they were negative comments, right? And I have never seen this. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. If you didn't know by now, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Another thing, by the way, that I'm going to want to get into is the fact that this is a recent change in the collective bargain. It's new in the latest collective bargaining agreement. It actually was a step forward for players, but it's clearly not all the way forward. And the Giants are kind of the first team to do this under the different rules. So we'll explain what that is and hear from the Giants union rep, Austin Slater, as well. But just to get Farhan Zaidi's response, very specific, released this to the media, and he said about this whole situation, quote, we did formally offer JD just slightly under $6.4 million, matching the raise of what we believe to be one of the most relevant comps in the case. We did not offer this as a, quote, best and final with no room to negotiate. The response came with less than 10 minutes to go before the exchange deadline that the number, quote, has to start with a 7. We asked if that was the best they could offer, and we're told again it had to start with a 7. We did not even view this as a formal counter since they did not commit that they would be willing to accept a specific number. They then filed at 6.9 and several hours after the deadline called looking to engage in a settlement. We said that out of fairness to our other negotiations and to maintain credibility with our policy, and this is me doing an aside here, Ben doing an aside, which is a file and trial policy, Zaidi continues, going forward, we were not in a position to negotiate once the exchange deadline had passed. And again, this is all stuff I said at the time of these deadlines, was that this is how they operate. This shouldn't surprise anyone. This shouldn't have surprised the agent. They shouldn't have called after the deadline looking to engage in a settlement, because the Giants have been clear that they are not willing to do that. They set a firm deadline for a reason, like to maintain credibility. That's exactly what I said at the time of explaining all this way back when this deadline was, not even in regards to JD Davis, but it ends up looking foolish when you file at 6.55 million, they file at 6.9 million, and you end up going to a hearing over a few $100,000. But in order to maintain your credibility as a file and trial team, meaning you will not negotiate past the deadline, if you start negotiating past the deadline, it becomes not a deadline at all, And so that's why you don't do it, for better or worse. That's just their policy, and it's a lot of teams' policy. It just wasn't under the previous regime here, but it is for a lot of teams, and now the Giants are one of those teams. So, remember I said if JD Davis had been offered $6 million guaranteed, should he have taken that versus trying to fight for $6.9 million in non-guaranteed money? And it turns out, I do not believe that Farhan Zaidi would go on record being this specific, just under 6.4 million. So, let's just even call that 6.3 million. So they're offering you $6.3 million in guaranteed money. If you say yes, okay, then it's a done deal. Lock it up, 6.3 in the bank. But if you say no, what are you risking? You're risking almost all of it because of the rules of the collective bargaining agreement that are new, but new in a better way for players. It used to be that all arbitration salaries were non-guaranteed through opening day. If you made it to opening day and you were still on the roster, becomes guaranteed. If not, you're getting prorated. You're only guaranteed kind of prorated portion based on time that you're on the roster during the spring. And so in the latest collective bargaining agreement, the players were able to get this big win, which is that they got it from being that all arbitration salaries were non-guaranteed to only arbitration salaries that went to a hearing. And so Austin Slater had something to say about this because, this news obviously got out in the Giants clubhouse. And what Austin Slater said was that was something we fought for and we got. However, the league wasn't willing to guarantee it if you went to a hearing. That remained the same. It was technically a win. Obviously, this is a very odd situation, and so there's maybe more light brought onto it than previous years. You never want to see something like that happen, but if there was a bright side out of it, it's that guys are engaged and noticed that something that shouldn't happen from a players' union standpoint, or that's something that shouldn't happen from a players' union standpoint. Obviously, we love to have Chappie here, and we're thinking of JD as a person. So Slater gets it. He's not out here saying the Giants did something wrong. He's just saying we fought for this, and we got a long way, but we didn't get all the way there. And the way that they didn't get all the way there was that still were not able to secure guaranteeing arbitration salaries that go to a hearing. And so if these accounts are correct, and again, even JD's agent said that the Giants' offer ended up being several $100,000 less than what they filed for. Again, he didn't say millions less. It's still a blunder by the agent. You have to, I would advise, it's almost like that he didn't realize that this contract was non-guaranteed if they went to a hearing. Giants had a ton of leverage in this situation. And so that's probably why they came in late with a number that was maybe a little bit low. But also Zaidi saying they didn't call it their best and final offer with no room to negotiate. Maybe it was a pretty tight window in which, they were willing to negotiate both time-wise and money-wise. But at the same time, guaranteed money is guaranteed money versus if you it's like they didn't know that the Giants had this file and trial policy, and I'm not going to say they didn't know that if they went to a hearing that it would be non-guaranteed, but think about it. Again, the Giants had been linked to Matt Chapman. JD Davis even commented on the Giants being linked to Matt Chapman and the possibility that the Giants could sign Matt Chapman before they signed Matt Chapman. He talked, I read an article, somebody was talking to him about this, and he was like, yeah, if it happens, it happens. I know that there's a bunch of other teams out there that would be interested in me, which it turns out they weren't, which stinks for him. And it's like he's probably worth quite a bit more than that, but nobody, literally not one team was willing to just take him for $6.9 million. That's what happened when he cleared waivers. So if you knew that there was a possibility that they would sign Chapman, and you knew that you could do the roster math and figure out you're the odd man out if they sign Matt Chapman, you really, really should have probably taken the $6.4 million or just under $6.4 million in guaranteed money. Again, that's according to Farhan Zaidi. I don't know. I just really doubt he would get. I've never heard a executive get this specific about negotiations, and I can't imagine that he would get that specific unless he had the receipts to back it up. So that's kind of all I have to say about that. Mostly, that's the most relevant kind of just laying it out and explaining it all. But mostly, I'm not happy about this from the perspective of JD Davis. It just stinks for him. It does seem like it's the fault mostly of his agent and not the Giants. They had to cut him loose because they couldn't find a trade partner. And the fact that no team was willing to claim him off waivers tells you what the interest level was from the league. And so, yeah, it's just a kind of loophole of the CBA, but sounds like JD's representation had a chance to avoid it by just kind of being a little bit hey, maybe we take a little bit of a pay cut here just so we can get the guaranteed part of that salary, because there is a possibility that they go out and they sign a Matt Chapman. And then where does that leave us? So anyway, we're going to turn the page in just a minute and discuss Alex Cobb way ahead of schedule. Does this change the timeline the possibility of a Blake Snell signing? Does this have an impact? We will get into it in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can simply plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies, TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive in to all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking, just everything you could possibly want. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you really should. Find us there. Trust me on this one. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. All right, as promised, we're going to get into the fact that Alex Cobb is way ahead of schedule. He threw to hitters today, did a live bullpen, and that is not something that you do unless you're getting close to kind of like game action. And, all along since the Giants announced that he was going to have this hip surgery, I've been confused about what the timeline was. They said something about 6 months, but he will resume throwing, or it was very vague, and I was never sure. And they still haven't been very clear about it. But when we start having progress reports like this, it seems to suggest that he is much closer than, All-Star break. We're talking, just a few days ago, we started hearing about May as a possibility. And now with this live bullpen, we're not being able to rule out April as a possibility for the return of Alex Cobb. And so, does that make a difference in the Giants' potential pursuit of other free agents, namely Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery? So the more I think about it, the more I think that they love the young pitchers that they have. I mean, you can't dispute that they haven't been pretty adamant about that. And also, some of these games that have been televised, first of all, Jordan Hicks looked nasty in the televised game, just throwing slider after slider, getting tons of strikeouts. And Keaton Winn is on his way back. Kyle Harrison dominated the Dodgers before that game got rained out. Mason Black has looked good. And then you start talking about Hayden Birdsong and Landon Roop, got that backwards, who looked extremely nasty. And so all of these young pitchers, not all of them are on the 40-man, and that does make a difference because you'd have to start, making some moves. And then you've got Carson Wisenhunt even in the mix as well, although he's a little bit behind schedule. So is Kai-Wei Tang, but they're trending in the right direction. And so they really truly do have a lot of young pitching talent that is close to Major League ready. And so, the question I've asked all along is do we trust, that they trust that these guys are as good as they say that they are? And they have been very clear that that is their position. Now, that could just be what they're saying in order to position themselves better in negotiations for a player like Blake Snell. However, if Alex Cobb is someone who could be back in April, I'm becoming more and more convinced that maybe a move does not get made, because all of a sudden you've got to think about it. You've got Logan Webb. You could slot in, Alex Cobb and Jordan Hicks after Logan Webb just to stick with some veteran guys. Kyle Harrison, would be nice to break up the righties with a lefty in there. But then you've suddenly only got one open rotation spot for a young player. I guess Kyle Harrison is also a young player, but Harrison seems like a guy who just absolutely deserves a spot in the rotation. And then we're just literally talking about one spot. And whether it's Keaton Winn, whether it's Mason Black, whether it's Landon Roop, I always want to get that backwards, or Hayden Birdsong or whoever, then you're kind of running out of room. And so if you were to sign a Blake Snell, and I'm not letting them off the hook here on the fact that I think Blake Snell would make them a better team dramatically, and I like that proven ability in my rotation rather than just going with so much inexperience. But Alex Cobb being ahead of schedule by so much does potentially change the calculus. That being said, he's coming off a major hip injury and surgery. Robbie Ray will be coming off a major arm injury and surgery. And Jordan Hicks is a converted reliever. Kyle Harrison is young and unproven, and so are any of the other young players. So that is why I'd be elated to see the signing of a Blake Snell, a Jordan Montgomery. Blake Snell would cost the Giants their third highest draft pick. They've already lost their second highest draft pick for the signing of Matt Chapman. And at this point, Snell's probably looking at a short-term deal with opt-outs. And we know the Giants get into those kinds of markets. But at the same time, you risk possibly losing these guys after one season and giving up those draft picks for only one season. But Snell would give you as good of a chance as anybody remaining to get to the postseason. And then once you're there, if you had Webb, Snell, Cobb, Harrison, Jordan Montgomery, Jordan Hicks, it would just become one of the better rotations in baseball. So I'm a little bit torn here, but certainly Alex Cobb being ahead of schedule could change the calculus. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow, we've got a zillion mailbag questions we get into. Hopefully, some more spiciness comes through with this JD Davis situation. We might get another response from JD's agent. But hopefully, I was able to break that down in a way that was understandable. I get that it's a little bit confusing. So anyway, once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much. So thank you in advance, and thank you sincerely to everyone who's done so already. I cannot wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening today. You are now Locked On Giants.